I'm going to take you behind the scenes with me and give you an update on what it's been like to write a design book. As you probably know, if you've been listening to the podcast for even a little while, I interview a lot of authors of design books, so I'm quite familiar with the finished product. But several years ago, I decided I wanted to try to write my own design book, and I waded into it knowing absolutely nothing about that side of the publishing industry, of the editorial side and of the pitching side. And I think it's kind of interesting. So I'm hoping that you might find this interesting as well. And maybe you'll be a little bit surprised, as I have been, about some of these steps that have needed to happen in order for me to be where I am right now, which is about, I would say, halfway through the process. Okay, so back up several years ago, I was starting to honestly get really burnt out. I had been working on the podcast for maybe 6 years at that point and cranking out episode after episode. I spend a lot of time on editing. I really care about making sure that the story arc of an interview makes sense to the listener and that the listener's really getting something out of it, either inspiration or education. And so creating the podcast is pretty time consuming. I do have some help. I have people that help me with my social media, sometimes people that help me with the tech kind of stuff. But frankly, I do quite a lot of it on my own and just getting tired and, not sure where this was going and was I reaching new people and was I making enough of an impact? Was I helping enough people? And so there was a big part of me, to be completely honest, and I was really thinking about throwing in the towel. I didn't want the constant pressure of the podcast deadline, and also I was really tired of just working alone with no one to bounce ideas off of and no one to share a vision and carry some of the workload. So anyway, that's where my head was at. I did take a nice little break to think about it all. I had this idea for a book in the back of my mind. It was kind of niggling at me, saying, gee, you're not really done yet with this whole slow style philosophy and this whole framework. You haven't written a book. And it's not that writing a book was on my bucket list. I really didn't want to until I had this idea, this kernel of an idea of what I might want the book to be about, what I was going to talk about. And now that I had this framework that I had started to teach, I thought, this actually would be great in a book format because there's a lot to it. And it would be really nice to have some visuals go along with what I'm teaching. And I think it might rejuvenate me to have this project of writing a book. Now, I did know way back when, at this point, that it was going to be hard, that it was going to be a lot of work, and that I probably wouldn't make any money off of it. I didn't know why necessarily or how true all of those things would be, but I felt like I was going into it with fairly open eyes and not super high expectations. So I think I might have taken a $200 online course or something about how to write a book proposal for a nonfiction, photograph-heavy book kind of thing, and I put it together, and it was really bare bones. I've gotten to know a lot of the publishers, but I really had only gotten to know the marketing side, the post-production side of publishing. Not the editorial side, and certainly not the pitching side, where you're trying to actually get a book deal. But anyway, at least I had a few people tangentially related to that, and so I sent it to them, and basically very kindly they let me know that it's not robust enough, because I didn't really have a vision, a very crystal clear vision. So poking around on the internet one day, came across someone who referred to themselves as a book proposal coach. Never heard of that, didn't know that was a thing, but I was pretty excited that there was somebody that actually knew what publishers were looking for in a book proposal. And by the way, I had talked to a lot of my friends, the people whom I've interviewed, about how they got their book deals, and in many of these cases, they got them because they had a really strong, large audience on social media. So they already had a built-in audience, and publishers love that. the publishing industry has really gone through some major changes since the age of blogging and the internet and now social media. Their budgets for marketing a new author in particular, there's practically nil. And so they're looking for people who already have an audience that is pretty sure they can sell a book to. Those people whom I've interviewed, those authors who just, someone came to them, that wasn't very useful to me because I don't have a big, huge audience on social media. And I'll get to that a little bit later. All right. So anyway, I hired this person to be my book proposal coach. And unbeknownst to me, it was going to take 2 years. What I found out was that a book proposal for a nonfiction book is very complex. It's huge. It's a big, huge project. It's like a thesis for graduate school. There are sections that are expected that I had no idea about. I didn't know what was supposed to go in them or that they even existed or that this was part of a book proposal. Things like target audience research and marketing plans and things like that. Took a ton of research, found it very fascinating. The proposal itself, writing it, really helped me crystallize my formula, my blueprint, my methodology for slow style, for how to teach someone how to do this. So it was actually a great experience for me. Even if the proposal never went anywhere, I still kind of got a lot out of it. It also cost me a few $1,000s because I hired a coach. And then it also ended up costing me a few $1,000 more because I needed to hire a graphic designer. It had to kind of look like a magazine. Like it had to have graphic design and interesting fonts and really to really illustrate the vision that the author has for what the entire concept of the book is and how it's going to be presented and how it's going to be received by potential readers. So it was a really large endeavor. And it was a little nerve-wracking because I'd been putting this money into it, really no idea if it was going to go anywhere. And also, remember, I was in this state of mind of kind of feeling like I've bottomed out here. I'm not sure I want to keep doing this. I'm burnt out. I don't know if I'm making a difference. I don't know if I'm growing. And so in some ways, I guess this was almost like a last-ditch effort to just say, okay, I still have a book inside of me. Maybe I just need to keep pushing through, because that's another thing about being an entrepreneur, being somebody who works for themselves and by themselves, is that you're constantly wondering, is it time? Have I hit the apex? Do I need to move on? Do I need to push forward? When do you push forward through the tough times? And when do you say enough is enough? And I think, I've talked also about having depression on this podcast before. Dealing with clinical depression for pretty much my entire adult life. Sometimes the unknown is really difficult for people with depression to deal with. It's probably difficult for everybody to deal with, frankly. But yeah, so I had all my mental health was at stake, all of this stuff. So it was a big risk. It was a big leap. Okay, so I've got this proposal. 2-year process, thousands of dollars in. I'm ready to send it out to some agents. Now, I had no idea how to even find agents. Like I said, a lot of the authors I've interviewed, they didn't have agents. They just worked directly with a publisher who came to them. But I had learned through reading a lot about the book publishing industry that agents really are really important. They're kind of the way to go, especially if you're a first-time author and you really don't know what you're doing, which I was certainly in that camp. So how do you find an agent? I asked my book publishing coach, did she know any? She offered a different option, which was to look through some of the other design books that I have and see if anyone is mentioning their agents in the acknowledgement section. So sometimes an author will thank their agent. Well, I thought this was a bit of a shot in the dark and felt like, I don't know, like not very efficient or effective, but it really was the only way I had to find these people because you couldn't just Google them, surprisingly. So that's what I did. And lo and behold, it worked. I think I found maybe 7 or 8 agents, and I sent out an inquiry letter and a proposal to each of them. And pretty quickly, I got back 2 responses. And I was shocked. I was over the moon. I thought, oh my gosh, because I had been told it could take months to even hear back from an agent. I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to work. This is going to work. Only to then be completely shot down with my first interview with one of the agents. I'm not sure why she even reached out to me. I'd like to think it was out of the kindness of her heart and her genuinely wanting to help me because she thought that my proposal itself had promise. But she basically told me straight up right away, yeah, I'm not going to be taking you on because you don't have an audience. And I tried to explain, well, I do have an audience. I have a podcast. But I don't think publishers really understand that world, the podcasting world. And the truth was I did not have a social media following. So now let me insert the story about that really quickly. I might have mentioned this on the show that I was hacked. My Instagram account was hacked. And what that means is some asshole from God knows where decided to ransom, I don't know how they do this sort of thing. They somehow get into your Instagram account and they take it and they have the ability to erase all of it for a ransom, for a fee. And I wasn't going to play that game. Everything was gone. My name was gone. So Little Yellow Couch was the name of my Instagram account. That was gone. All of my posts were gone. All of my content, all of my videos, all of my photos, everything gone. And probably most importantly, my followers were gone. Over 7,000 followers. So I now had almost no social media presence whatsoever to show a potential publisher. And I immediately found out just how critical and dire my situation was with that first meeting with the first agent. The truth is that I only had 7,000 something people. Frankly, that's not a lot. Not in the world of design and publishing and having influence and blah, 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 and all that stuff that we are bombarded with nowadays. Now I'm showing my age because I'm getting a little prickly about it all because I don't like it. Anyway, so yes, I have started to rebuild my Instagram profile. I am now at Slow Style Home. If you are on Instagram and you don't follow me, I would really love it if you would. It would help me so much. I don't think I'm even up to 1,000 people yet on this new account. Anyway, I digress. I then get another agent response, and I'm cautiously optimistic. But I fear that it's going to be the same kind of conversation. Look, we really like your proposal, but is there any way you can, quickly get to 10,000 followers on at least on Instagram? Because that would be really, really helpful. I was so happy to find out that is not what this second agency said to me. It was meeting with two agents, the owner and one of the other lead agents. And they didn't even bring up the social media. I think maybe I brought it up eventually, but they were just really, really excited about the concept. And I was so thrilled that they got it. They understood this is not going to be a typical design book that features beautifully designed homes, nor was it going to be a book that was just about me and my home, just kind of showing what I've done in it. This was really meant to be a teaching book, a book for people to start to put together their own beautiful, meaningful homes. So, needless to say, I signed with them, and they have been amazing ever since. The name of the agency is Renaissance out in LA, and I have been working with Alan and Jacqueline for probably a year at this point. So, I signed with them, and then they started sending it out, and I am getting crickets. I wasn't hearing anything. So finally I hear from Jacqueline. She says, well, all of the responses we've been getting are around the same lines, which is great proposal, no social media following. We can't market the book. Now, I have to say, I wasn't surprised. So I wasn't completely deflated by this, but I was pretty sure this was never going to happen. And so, I'm trying not to spiral. I'm trying not to get, go down into a deep, dark hole of depression. I'm trying to push forward with the podcast and just keep doing what I'm doing because I still believe in it. I still believe that slow style is a really great way to create a home that will actually make you happy. But I'm feeling like I need to let go of this dream. So now it's been about 6 months, maybe even 8 months, and Jacqueline calls and says, we've got a meeting with a publisher. And I'm just floored. And again, I'm like trying not to be too optimistic. But I'm really hopeful at this point and nervous, very nervous about what they're going to say about my following. So I meet with them, and this is Madge Baird from Gibbs Smith, which is a publishing house that does a lot of interiors books. She didn't say anything about the social media following. She, just like my agents, loved the concept. Understands that having an audience on a podcast is legitimate, is equals a real audience. And she just really is excited about the concept. She already has a few ideas about things that she might change, but she's really wants to sign with me. Oh, I'm so excited. Oh my God, this is like the best day ever. And then I get like a couple weeks go by and I don't hear anything. And I ask my agents, what's taking so long? Are they having second thoughts? And they said, I don't know. And then Madge contacts them and says, we need to run this by our sales team. And then I thought, oh no, once again, this is going to be it. They're going to say, oh, well, this person doesn't have a social media following. But that didn't happen either. Apparently, the sales team loved it as well. Was so shocked and excited. So now I've passed pretty much what I thought was going to be the biggest hurdle. It's probably not the biggest hurdle, but it's a pretty big one, which is actually getting a book deal. So what does that mean? Well, let me tell you, it is you get an advance and an agent, hopefully, if you have one, is negotiating on your behalf for how much it's going to be, but also how it's going to be doled out. You don't get the whole thing at once, especially not if you're a first-time author. And the amount that you're given, I have no idea. I have no way of judging, well, this is a lot, this is a little. What my agent told me was that this is sort of at the upper tier of what a new first-time design book author would be getting. So I'm feeling good about that. I don't feel comfortable saying the exact amount, but let me just say I knew already that, as I had heard from every other author that I'd ever talked to, I probably won't be able to make a lot of money on this book. And that's because the author of the book, out of the budget that they're given by the publisher, the advance, out of that comes all the photography. What the publisher pays for is the production of the book, including the art direction and the layout, and then, of course, the printing. So this fee that I was going to be given, not all at once, so doled out over 3 different installments, was going to have to be used to pay for photography. So I think I'll be lucky if that is just over half of the budget, of the total budget. The second half of the budget is going to be spent on marketing the book and on paying for a publicity and a book tour. So this is what people mean when they say authors don't actually make any money. That's okay. I kind of knew that going into it. Now it's time to write the book. We're now in 2024, and I've just handed in the entire manuscript and all of the photos to my publisher, which is the bulk of my work. At this point, what's happening is my editor, who is someone, I've been assigned an editor who works for Gibbs Smith to work just with me on this book. She is going to start the editing process and will be communicating and collaborating with me going forward. So what has the process been like of writing a design book, and especially with this whole photography business? Because it's not a book about one designer and having a photographer go in and photograph all of their work at once. It's not about me and my house only. There are photos of my house in the book, but that's not what it's all about. How do I go about doing this? And honestly, this was a sticking point for me. I was perilously close to spiraling into another depression, going, I am not going to be able to fulfill my end of the contract to this publisher because I have no idea how to start thinking about putting this book together. I know what I want to say. I've got my chapter outlines, but the whole point is finding photos that illustrate what it is I'm trying to teach. How am I going to do that? Do I start by writing? Do I start by finding the photographs? I was just sort of frozen there for a few months. So I'm now tick-tock, the clock is going on my deadline to produce something for the publisher. I finally got out of my procrastination frozen zone and decided that the way to do it was to actually pick a handful of designers and just concentrate on them and just look through their photographs and not try to open up my whole world to every designer I've ever met. That really helped a lot. That made it feel much more manageable, but I still had to decide, am I going to hire my own photographer, and together we would travel to all of these different designers' residences and clients' homes to take photographs? Or was I going to look through the designers' portfolios and pick photos that already existed, and then get in touch with the photographers that they hired and pay those photographers for usage rights for the book. I decided to go that route. It seemed like it was more practical. I wouldn't have the expense of traveling. I wouldn't have to hire a photographer to take all new photos. So I decided to go the other route. That proved to have its own challenges. So the first being, I had no idea how much a photographer was going to charge for each photograph that they had already taken. And it turned out a lot. So I go back to my agents and I say, what am I going to do? Do we have to pull out? Is this never going to happen? And they said, well, here's the thing. If you ask them, explain the situation, maybe they don't know much about the publishing world, that you just don't have the budget, let's see if they can work with you to make it more reasonable. And I was really nervous about this. I don't like talking to people about money. I don't like devaluing people's work. I would love to pay the photographers whatever their asking price was. I understand that it's an art and they're worth it. But I had to do it. I really had to do it. I had to overcome my fear of rejection and my fear of offending people and suck it up and just ask. And I started asking, and they were incredibly kind and generous. They did understand my situation. I think they truly believed that I was telling the truth, that I was being honest, which I was, that it's not like I didn't want to pay them. And they've all been so gracious, and they've all been willing to accept a fee that I can afford, but that is also at least reasonable to them. So, that was a huge series of weeks there where I was really biting my nails on that. Okay, so now I just have to go through the task of sorting through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of photos by these 10 designers to try to figure out what's going to make the most sense for each of the chapters and each of the points I'm trying to illustrate. I have one deadline for the publisher where I have to have half of it all turned in. The first half, writing was pretty smooth. I mean, it just kind of flowed. I knew what I wanted to say, and I was able to get a lot of stuff out on paper, and I really, 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 really enjoyed it. And I also really enjoyed finding the right photographs to illustrate all of the points that I was making. Then it's time to crack down and do the second half of the book. Hired my photographer, Erin Little, out of Portland, Maine, and she came and she photographed the house. I've got my designers tracking down some of the photographers. There's just a lot of back and forth. I mean, I'm juggling 10 plus designers plus all of their photographers, and some of these designers have multiple photographers. So it's just logistically, it's just kind of a nightmare. I was sweating it out, getting everything in by the deadline. So that's where I'm right now. I've finished the whole manuscript. I've got all my photos. The editor now has it, and she's going to start the editing process, and we'll start collaborating on that. They asked me to pick a few photos that might make for good cover photos, so I've put in my suggestions for that, and then I'll be working with their art direction team. Apparently, I don't know how one goes about laying out a book. That'll be super interesting to me. So I'm excited about that. And then, as I mentioned when I was talking about budget and money just a few seconds ago, the rest of the money that I get is probably going to be put toward marketing the book, because I really want to have a book tour that is engaging. Just like I really try to engage people on the podcast, I like to engage with people in real life as well. So when I do a book tour, I don't want to just sit down in a bookstore and sign books. I would like to have a book tour with stops in antique shops or furniture showrooms, or I don't know, beautiful gardens, or maybe designers' homes, even places where you the listeners of the show are going to really be excited to go, and there'll be something to do other than to get a signed copy of my book. There'll be a talk, or there'll be a luncheon, or there'll be a high tea, or there'll be a cocktail party. And I want the venues to be beautiful and interesting, and they themselves give you some inspiration along with the book, so that the entire experience is really memorable and inspires you to keep creating that beautiful, meaningful dream home that I know you have in your mind, that I really believe that you can have. So all that's going to cost some money. So that's what I'm expecting the second half of my budget to be put toward. I've hired somebody whom I love. I've worked with him. He's been the representative for several design authors whom I've had on the show. His name is Austin Mill, and together I think we're going to come up with some pretty great events for the book. So that's where it's at. I might do a follow-up to this with the second half of like, well, how is a book laid out and how is it produced and all that. I mean, I don't know about you, but I find this all kind of interesting, knowing nothing about how a book is made to now really understanding the inner workings of it. It's been a really fun educational experience for myself. So that's why I'm sharing it with you. I hope it's of interest to you. And we are on a break for the podcast. We'll be back soon with new interviews. But right now, I'm just taking a little bit of a celebration break that I have gotten this far, and look forward to being back in your earbuds very soon. In the meantime, be well and go love your home. Bye for now.